Hey, everybody. Welcome again to episode 2 of the Inspection Report. Today, we're joined by Will Malone with Independent Roofing. He's a local roofing pro. He's got his own company, and we'll give him an opportunity to kind of introduce himself a little bit. Also joined by co-host Tim Netzley, professional inspector, along with myself at Inspect Montana. So, Will, welcome.
Thank you for having me, guys. It's good to see you.
Good to have you. We've worked with, I was joking earlier, we worked with Will for probably over 10 years and seen each other 3 or 4 times with the whole time. A lot of phone and text and stuff, but not a lot of in-person stuff. But Will always does a fantastic job, independent roofing. He's got a good crews, I guess, huh? Does everything from commercial and residential.
Yep, we do commercial and residential roofing.
So tell us a bit about yourself, if you would.
So Independent Roofing was started by myself and my business partner, Chad Jacobson. That was back in 2007. We had both been independent contractors at that time. Chad probably 5 years, probably myself maybe 7. And so we just decided to join forces and see what we could do together as a team and accomplish maybe some bigger goals that we couldn't do by ourselves.
Nice. Seems to have worked out.
Over the years, slowly have built our business and our reputation. It wasn't easy, because as you remember in 2008, 2009, the economy took a downturn.
Yeah.
And so, there were some lean times in there, but we just kept fighting and just kept working and kept our heads down. And eventually, as the economy turned around and all that work we put in, ended up paying dividends down the road. And so over time, we've been able to have a successful roofing company that's based a lot still today on just the relationships that we've built over this, 18 years.
Yeah. Probably the driver of most successful companies is those that pay attention to the relationships and take care of people.
Right. Yeah. So we definitely try to do that for our customers. I know you guys are also, big with referrals and long-term clients, like a lot of the realtors that when we show up to do something for a realtor, a lot of times we see the same faces at these job sites. So
it's kind of funny, actually. I think I wasn't even aware initially that you were sort of Tim's go-to guy when it came to referring roofers. And I came to the same conclusion. Yes. that you guys were the people that we liked, but I came to that conclusion just kind of by myself and seeing work and asking, well, who did yours?
Right.
A little funny that we both ended up coming to the same guy and saying, oh, you like Will too? Yeah, I like his work as well. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
What he's saying is when we started growing, I didn't have good notes to share. It was all it was a bit of a struggle.
Yeah.
Through that evolution, but yeah.
I think a big part of, we have kind of a list of guys that we like to refer to our clients for different things. And I think what resonated with me, who we like to refer is more than just quality of work, but somebody who's, he's not going to ghost you. They'll get back to you, whether your job is the right fit for them or not, they're going to respond one way or another, and they're not going to leave you in the dark. And so that's a big thing. And
that's a pet peeve of mine, is that lack of communication by some, or blowing off. I mean, even if you can't do the job or don't want the job sometimes, you still have to communicate those things,
right. Yeah, definitely try to get back with everybody the best we can. It's somewhat of a whirlwind, after COVID, it's kind of a weird time. And, as we were thinking, what's going to happen here? Are we going to get shut down? And then all of a sudden, with the influx of people moving here, our builders who were maybe building, 5 houses a year, all of a sudden we're doing 15 houses,
right.
20 houses a year, and then it seemed like, that was kind of tapering off last year. And then, we had the big windstorm last July, and then everything kind of went nuclear again. And I suspect in the coming years, it should be more of a typical inflow of work. That's the hope anyways, right?
Oh, well, we've suspected that for a couple of years now.
Right.
Yeah, I was in the process of hiring, I was in the process of hiring an inspector anyway, when COVID hit. And I thought, well, that's it for a while.
Right.
And like you're saying, quite the opposite happened. It just took off, and I'm going, I need to hire 2 inspectors. It was pretty crazy. And every year kind of expected us to sink back to the levels pre-COVID, and it just never did.
Yeah, it's really visible.
Certainly
all
is.
the time.
The growth has slowed down, but it's still growing.
Right.
So you're up to a couple of teams now. How many guys do you have?
Yeah, it varies, but usually for us, it's a workforce of, 7 people to 12 people. And luckily, most of our employees are long-term, and that's something that we've taken a lot of pride in over the years, so that, roofer team shows up at your job site or house, in 2020, and here in 2025, it's the same faces, it's the same people. We really try to still put ourselves in the position of the installer, and just try to treat, everybody on our team the way, I would want to be treated. And, just like a really respectful workforce that wants to stick around and be part of the team.
Imagine as a roofer, that's a fairly short lifespan, typically.
There is typically a lot of turnover in our trade. And
Physically taxing job.
Yeah, physically taxing.
the thing is just, trying to create like the best that you can, to create a good work environment so that the job is hard enough without putting in other things to make it, less desirable job.
That's quite laudable.
Overall, we see a lot of varying degrees in quality of work, we'll say, just as the nature of the job of being an inspector, and we get on hundreds of roofs, in any given year. There's obviously something that sets you guys apart that attracts guys like us to want to refer you. And what do you think from your perspective sets independent roofing apart in a region that doesn't have much shortage for roofing contractors, from what I can tell?
I think it's just having a set program of details. Everybody knows what the expectation is. And so, we have this expectation of quality, and they seem like simple things, but those are going to be the things, from a professional standpoint that you guys can see. And so, it's chimney flashings, it's metal detail, it's their detail around your pipes and things like that. And so those are the things you can see. And then underneath that, is the stuff that's being done that's really keeping the roof dry and making it last long. And so over time, it's just developing these processes and these details so that we have just a high quality product at the end. And it's, in our culture, and it's important to me, it's important to Chad Jacobson. And then that way it's important to everybody on the crew. So we have try to have, a high level of professionalism and people who care. Like we don't need to be the biggest, we don't need to have the most production. What we want is everything that we produce to be at a high level. And that's really our goal.
Yeah. Well, I think we can very much empathize with that. And what we've tried to do on our side of things is we don't need to be the highest producing. We don't necessarily even need the biggest market share, when it comes to inspections performed. But when
Those are nice.
right. But when we do our work, we want people to see a difference.
Yeah.
We want to set ourselves apart in that way. I'm really glad that you mentioned chimney flashing, because I wanted to ask you about that. I don't know what it is. And so clearly it's not you guys, but inspection after inspection, seller's agent tells us the roof was just replaced. You get up there, the shingles tell that story, but the chimney flashing is the same as it was. You're doing a 1940s house, and instead of the chimney flashing being replaced, I've actually seen guys spray paint it a newer silver color to make it look better. But is that just one of those, we talk about, kick out flashing, we talk about chimney flashing. Is that one of the things that doesn't really get worked out in a typical contract for a new roof? Maybe the roofer says we do shingles and shingles only, or is that just something you think needs to be done every time, no matter what?
It's going to depend a little bit on what the chimney is. Most of the time you're replacing the roof, and that flashing that's on there is really old. And it's just something that always bothered me in the past when I worked for another employer, or I would see like what you would see. And so for us, if we see an old flashing, that's something like we're really big on, is just replacing the flashing all the way around the chimney, the back pan if it has a back fan, and then a new counter flashing, so that everything is new and everything is code and it hasn't been shot through 100 times with a bunch of nails and a bunch of rusty flashing. It's just the details. For people who appreciate details, that's an important one. And so for us, that's just a non-negotiable thing, that has to be done. It's got to be right.
Well, you don't want to undermine your own work either. The homeowner spends, $10,000, $20,000 on a new roof, and then, the chimney flashing is what leaks.
What was the point?
And then what was the point of the new roof in the first place? So
That's kind of how we see it.
Mm-hmm.
We see a lot of times, even if the bottom flashing is replaced around the chimney, the counter flashing is not, they're lifted up. And you can tell because it's still flying like Sally Field's hat. That's for older people.
Yeah, I'll do a polite chuckle at that, but I'm that's over my head.
It's still kicked out. I mean, because you can't bend that out, and then it seems maybe a lot of roofers either don't want to take the time or don't really know how to scribe in their counter flashing on a masonry chimney.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, I think it's just
Depending on, your perspective and the company, because each roofing person or installer is going to, maybe be coming from a little different angle. But, it's a lot of times you get paid on how fast you can get out of there. So it's just turn and burn. For the housing aspect of installing, it's just that we have a price for everything that's on the roof, so that the installer, they already know what the expectation is, but we're not asking them to do that for free.
So it's like,
that has a price to do it right. If we cut open the ridge vent and it's, and it's not cut out correctly, or it's not done to spec, you don't have to just, I don't want to take the time to do it right because I'm getting paid just to put on the shingles. It's like, no, we're going to pay you to cut that strip out all the way, or whatever the thing is on the roof, because that's part of it too, right? It's like we want the owners to have confidence that everything was done to spec, but we want from an installer point of view, we want them to know, like, hey, I'm getting paid to do it.
Well, that's why you've got long-term employees and have that quality assurance.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine you can have much control over the quality if you're doing it the other way, that if you're not making sure your field installer.
Right. But it's kind of a weird thing because it's not really a code thing, to do chimney flashings, and you can get away with it. And so a lot of people do. And I think you had asked me once, what's a thing that you see all the time that bugs you? And it's like when you see a new roof and you see like a crappy chimney flashing, that like, that always kind of drives me crazy. This is like a pet peeve. And, the things that, like you were saying, that do leak, it's the penetrations. And I don't know how many times, you get a call where the people tell you, well, we just had our roof replaced, but the skylight leaks or the chimney leaks. It's penetration that they didn't take the time to take care.
Yeah. I've seen it as bad as, and more often than we should, of course. It is more often than we get, but even the rubber boots don't get changed out.
Right. That's really,
and they deteriorate in the sun, so yeah, that's just ridiculous. Like you're saying, you're spending thousands of dollars on a roof and you can't afford that $15 new jack.
Right. Or just because maybe the delivery
person, forgot to have it delivered, and the guy didn't want to take the time to run down to the supply house to change it out or whatever. So that's the kind of stuff you don't want, for sure, and it's weird, how much you see it, the details not being done to a high standard.
The intent is that we sort of have a shared audience, us as inspectors and you as a roofing contractor.
Sure.
We're working for potential homeowners, for homeowners, and then
commercial investors as well.
And commercial investors and just real estate professionals in general, whether it's them getting us to perform an inspection and then we find something that then kind of kicks the responsibility in a sense over to somebody like you to kind of pass it along. In that transition, which is sort of the point of this podcast in general, is when we pass that baton off, so to speak, to another contractor who can sort of take it to the next level. One thing that we always get asked about is, well, is it a spot repair situation or is it a full roof replacement situation? And I kind of wanted to get into those details on at what point when we're looking at a roof, and, you know, we see a lot of granular loss. Us as inspectors, we're never trying to age a roof because that tends to get us in trouble when we try to do that. Oh, it's got 15 years left. And then the next day after the inspection, it starts leaking. You know what I mean? So we're never trying to do that. But are there some of the telltale signs, so to speak, that we're changing that recommendation from, yeah, you might be able to limp this thing along for a little bit longer, to what I usually say is, you know, any roofer who comes up here and looks at this is probably just going to say, let's do the whole thing over again.
Right. Yeah, that can be tricky, right? Because there's a buyer and a seller, and their perspectives are different, you know? Sometimes, like you say, we looked at a roof recently over on Beverly Avenue for a client, and we both had the same opinion of the roof because it was just obvious that it was timed out or getting close.
But with that particular one, nobody had been on the roof for a while, and from the street, it looked like it'd probably be fine.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. So that's, you know, probably something to talk about is just like pre-2000 shingles were 3-tab saturated felt paper shingles with no fiberglass.
Roofing contractor, what are some of the different materials that your team specifically works with? Are you guys doing majority asphalt shingle roofs, or do you guys do metal? And are there any more high quality exotic stuff that you guys are working with?
Yes. For the residential market, what you're going to be putting on probably 90% of the time are asphalt shingles, architectural style fiberglass asphalt shingles. And the reason is they look good, you know, pretty much maintenance free. You know, they once they sealed, you know, it's a closed system, so you don't have to worry about bugs or animals getting in there. Class A fire rated. You know, they all come with pretty good, you know, really good warranties. And then the price is still, even though everything has gone up since COVID and, you know, it's not going to come back down, you know, the price to do an asphalt shingled roof system is, you know, one of your most affordable pricing options. And so that's why you see it everywhere. But we also do a lot of metal roofing, a lot of standing seam metal roofing, and that's commercial, and also it's more for our builder clients on new construction. And then Chad Jacobson, my partner, he mostly specializes in the commercial realm. So, you know, he'll be doing the single ply membrane, white rubber roofs, EPDM and things like that.
So, TPO.
Yeah. What I feel like, and I'm probably guilty of this too, whenever a client asks me, you know, I'm getting a roof replace, advantages of asphalt shingle over metal, I tend to just kind of, you know, glorify metal roofs, you know, above asphalt just in general, just because it seems, you know, if you look just at the numbers, they tend to be rated for, you know, while architectural asphalt shingle, maybe 25 to 30 years, metal roofs are closer, you know, 60, 80 years or so. They're not maintenance free, but what are some of the challenges with a metal roof that maybe aren't being taken into account when I'm recommending?
So there's two types of metal, generally speaking, you know, and you're going to have a standing seam metal, which is all the fasteners are concealed. And then you're going to have exposed fastener, and most people think of that generally as like delta rib. And so when you're thinking of a metal roof, or at least when I think of a metal roof, I want it to be long lasting. I want the system to be closed. I don't want bugs or critters getting in there, and look good and maintenance free, you know, as much as you can have that. And so really that's going to be standing seam metal. As you guys know, probably with the exposed metal fastener systems, there's, you know, little foam closures that go on the bottom, the insect or the squirrels take those out and bees can build nests in them and bats get in there and then the screws back out and stuff. And so I think you're almost better with a shingled roof than an exposed metal fastener roof.
Interesting. Okay.
It seems like, there's less maintenance and it seems like it's a more closed system. And so if you're jumping up to standing seam, it's not that there's anything wrong with metal. It's just that the price becomes prohibitive for a lot of folks. And so the plus side of standing seam metal roof would obviously be the longevity of it. The metal is going to last a lot longer than a shingled roof. Even though asphalt shingled roofs are Class A fire rated, obviously that metal is going to last longer if you were to have a fire event. The downside would be some of the things that happen with a metal roof that people don't think about are like snow slide.
Mm-hmm.
And that can vary just from house to house, depending on the pitch of the roof, how the house is oriented, with the sun in winter. And so then, then maybe you have to add snow stops, and that can be a cost or deal with, snow sliding. And so that's probably the biggest factor I would think with a metal roof is just, it's going to behave differently under snow conditions. And then you have to be prepared to sort of design the roof to deal with sliding snow.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is the best roofing material if somebody wants to put solar on their roof?
That's a good question. I have not really thought of that, but it'll be interesting because, people are putting on so much solar right now, and most people are doing that over shingles. It'll be interesting how that plays out over a 5 and 10, 15-year time period. But I mean, it would seem to make sense that metal would be a good option.
I always considered that standing seam would be the best because you can get the bracketry that pinches the seam rather than penetrates the
Yeah, that's what I would think too. Again, most of the solar that you see, it's going on over shingled roofs, and it's a bit of a pain because, we have some jobs coming up this year where we have to call the solar company. They come out, they have to pull all that stuff off, stack it, let us do our thing, and then they have to come back and put it back on. So I would think, I would think probably the most important aspect of that is just from the inspector side or from, if somebody was asking us, and maybe in a future podcast, you'll have a solar person to talk about this with, is just making sure that before they put that on, that's been part of the consideration. It's a lot of work to take that stuff off and reset it.
Would you be able to put a ballpark estimate on how much an existing solar array system increases the cost of a roof replacement just because you've got this extra step thrown in?
I don't know what they charge because we don't touch it. The solar people come in and they're responsible for it. So I wouldn't be able to speak.
Right. Okay. But it doesn't necessarily, because they're handling it, it doesn't really add any more to your process.
Okay. Our process.
For some practical concerns for homeowners, early warning signs for a failing roof. I know it can be difficult from the ground to kind of assess things.
Back in the day, but people would look up and see that their shingles were curling, and that was the telltale sign that their asphalt roof shingle was going bad. And those shingles would curl because they were just basically asphalt saturated felt with granules, for the color and for the UV protection. And as the shingles would go bad, the felt would curl up. My roof is bad, and we would replace the roof. And with the new architectural shingles, because they're made out of fiberglass, the fiberglass platform is really stable. And so from the ground, you're not going to see curling anymore. But what seems to happen is a lot of times is that the granules will start coming loose from the platform. And so I think for a homeowner, it would be looking for excessive granules after it rains at the base of their downspout. For a homeowner, it would be when they're looking at their roof, if they see the roof losing color. And as the granules come loose from the shingle, you'll see the black sort of splotching. And then the next level of degradation would be as you lose the asphalt from the shingle, they'll start to see
The silver.
Yeah,
And you
that
guys have
kind
seen
of
that.
shining edge where,
Fiberglass.
in the morning, the sun's catching the fiberglass.
Yeah, so as they see that, then they know they're pretty far along.
Okay.
So I think for, just your average homeowner is when they look up and they realize, it's like, well, my roof used to look a lot more brown or green or whatever. And now it looks starting to look black.
I might be listening in places.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if you see silver,
Yeah.
that shiny, like you said, that's definitely a telltale sign.
Okay. No, I think back to kind of what you were talking about earlier with the two different mentalities between a seller and a buyer, and, the seller's mentality of, well, I've lived here for so many years and I haven't had any issues. So why all of a sudden are you telling me that I need a new roof? And the buyer is really just kind of relying on the expertise of the home inspector to be making that recommendation. And
I like to say everything works till it doesn't.
Right.
It's funny that whether it's a roof or any other component of the house, a lot of times you may hear something like that. Well, it's been fine this whole time. Well, that's great, but everything has a lifespan.
Working with realtors, one thing that I think we've done a good job at is that over time is building a good relationship with the realtors so that they know that they can trust us. And so I know, like, a lot of times when we get sent out to look at something, I see you guys there because you guys are dealing with a lot of the same real estate professionals, and they trust you to deliver them honest answers. And so when we show up to look at a roof, you have a buyer and a seller, and they're having different perspectives. And what I try to do is just to give it to them straight, And so there's times like recently on Beverly Avenue where we had the same viewpoint of a particular roof and we knew that it was bad. And so those are great, because that's easy. It's like you can give them a solid answer. This roof is bad. You should replace the roof, and here's a price. And sometimes the tricky ones are when you show up and it's like you can see it from the seller's perspective. It's like, well, if you were staying here, I would say, maybe keep this roof for another 5 years. But now this person's buying it and you can see that it's starting to age and it's in that kind of in-between spot. And so, like, those are kind of like the more difficult ones to, present your case for, because, even though I get paid by putting on roofs, it's important to just maintain that integrity of giving buyer and seller an honest answer so that, you maintain that trust. And so, we really try hard for, the real estate community that we work with to give honest perspectives and
Insight as to what's going on with roofs in those transactions.
Right.
But in the end, when it is a real estate transaction, like you say, the two different perspectives, it's ultimately up to them to hash it out. You're going to say 5 years. The seller says there's 5 years left, and the buyer says there's only 5 years left.
That's a really good point, right? Yeah.
Luckily, I think for the most part, the realtors know us and they know that they can trust us to deliver them an answer. So a lot of times buyer seller will be like, hey, Will Malone with Independent Roofing is coming to look at the roof. And so they'll be like, okay, that's good because, we trust him, because they know, like, I'm not trying to just, here's your bid. This is what we do. Like, I'm, trying to do the right thing for everybody. And
Yeah, when that conversation comes up between us and the realtor, oftentimes they're already somewhat familiar, if not intimately so,
Right.
with independent roofing.
Yeah.
so, yeah, over time, it's, we have developed a lot of those relationships. And so, as it's just important not to, it's the same thing that you guys are doing. You're not trying to overemphasize or underemphasize anything. You're just trying to give an honest perspective of what the case is so that everybody, knows what it is.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the same way we try to approach it also. And so, every time you go look at a roof for a realtor, it's not necessarily a job, but sometimes it is, and that's why you go. And that's why you have a good reputation, is because of all the times where, you just gave your honest opinion and you weren't trying to, sell it.
Right. Yep. Agree.
I did have one kind of specific question. It's a point that can add quite a bit of cost to a re-roof, to my understanding, and it's when and what is and what is not considered skip sheathing.
You're right.
I've performed a lot of inspections where I go up into an attic and it is plank sheathing, even plank sheathing that the code or the jurisdiction may consider to be solid decking, but it's just shrunk a little bit. So you do have some gapping, but it's maybe not wide enough to be considered skip sheathing. So how do you guys determine that line? Do you always leave it up to the jurisdiction to determine that line? Is older plank sheathing, and it's not skip sheathing necessarily, but maybe the gaps between the boards are a little wider than you'd like them to be.
Yeah.
Where does that line get drawn as far as triggering the need to redeck the roof?
For those listening that may not know the difference between plank and skip and whatnot, would you mind explaining?
Yeah, that's a good point. On older houses, as you guys know, but maybe some of the people out there don't know, would be sometimes the sheeting is put on with 1x8, 1x6 boards, and then there's going to be gaps in between each board. And the gaps could be 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch or more. And so what happens is when you're roofing, right, is you put on felt paper or your underlayment paper, and then on top of the underlayment, you're going to start installing your shingles, and the shingle is going to have 4 to 6 nails in every shingle. And so when you're doing that, you don't know where those gaps are. And so the problem is when you're installing over skip sheeting, 1x4 boards that may have 1/4 to 1/2 inch gaps in between each board, is that you could end up shooting into the gap. And now your shingle you just put on has nothing holding it down. And so that's the major problem with skip sheeting. The other problem with skip sheeting is that over time, the shingles sort of conform to that shape. And so, you can get like a distorted look, or, the shingles, depending on how big the gaps are, can sort of, it'll start to fall in those gaps. If it was a real estate transaction and knew it was skip sheeting, you would probably want to make the case, if the gaps are there to resheet it. So when we resheet it, we're usually using like a 7/16 OSB, and we're just putting that on top of the existing 1x4 or 1x6 deck boards, so that the roofing substrate surface is smooth and ready to accept a nail, and so that the new shingled roof is on a suitable platform. For an owner not in a real estate transaction, if we know there's skip sheeting, we try to be prepared beforehand, so that we're not ambushing the homeowner. We get it off, we can look at it together with them. We can explain the problems of the deck board. If it's just, really bad, really beat up, you just have to tell them, like, I can't put your new shingles on this surface. We have to reskin it. Maybe if it's like in between, maybe you make the case to them, this is why you should do it. But if it's your house, if you don't want to do it, that's fine. But, just put it in writing that I explained to you why you should and that you didn't want to. So if any of these issues ever arise, that it's, that's on you, not on me. In the shingle manufacturer's install instructions, they have their recommendations. And so when this does happen, what we present is like, this is what the manufacturer recommends. This is what the city of Missoula recommends, because, we're usually working in Missoula. And that's, so we're just trying to do it the right way.
Is there a gap size that either the city or the manufacturer takes it from, well, it's solid deck planking to the gap is too big?
Each manufacturer has a little bit of a different read on it. And I think Missoula says, because they follow the ABC. And so I think that says 1/4 inch or greater. And then each manufacturer might be a little bit different. So you just have to know what the code is and what the manufacturer spec is, and, just do the right thing that way.
Probably a little bit for, to your comfort level as well. So you may be able to justify not redecking the roof, but, because the spacing is just under that limit, but you may still recommending to the client,
That's right.
in the best interest for the longevity of the shingle we're going to install, you may want to redeck it anyway.
Yeah, I think it's in the past, kind of think of it as like a generation of roofer that's, maybe 10 years older than me. Those guys,
An old roofer.
did things like, wrote out estimates like, here's your estimate, or shook hand, and was like, well, it was like that before, don't worry about it. We'll just do it again. It's just a different level of professionalism in the industry is what I'm trying to say. And then I feel like my generation came along and Excel spreadsheets and looking at the specs more. And so I think some of the things that were acceptable in the past,
They're just not a best practice anymore.
Is part of that maybe the warranty got tighter as well?
yeah, the warranty got tighter. And then there's just like the liability of it, to try to cut a corner for a client. Ultimately, I'm going to pay the price for it. And so it's just not worth it. But again, it's like it's their money, it's their house. And so you just want to present them with the information, hopefully in an honest way and a way that's not, scary or something like that, but just so that they can feel good about the choice they're making.
How far does that go typically? Because in parts outside of some jurisdictions, it's state land and they don't require roofing permits for residential.
Right.
They don't look at them. And so you're really stuck with the integrity of the installer and the warranty of the material that you're using. But we see often where a low pitch roof will have shingle put on it,
Right.
asphalt shingle. And the code says that 212 is the minimum, but a lot of the manufacturers start at 312. If the client says, that's what I want, what do you do with that?
You just say, I'm not interested in the job.
Yeah, because ultimately it's going to come back to you
Yeah.
when something happens.
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, maybe in 2007, you're young, you're eager, you're just trying to make, and then as you gain experience and you're less willing to take risk for no reason. And at this point in our career, it's not worth the liability to do something like that. If you know, like there's like the right way to do it, or if the sheeting is bad and they're insistent on it and you just know it's bad, you just have to just dig your heels in and just say, I can't do it because it's gonna come back on me, and someone's, either you or somebody down the line is gonna come back and say, why did you do this? And that when you don't want that.
I always hope that when we run across those, it's because Joe homeowner didn't know better and did it himself or
Right.
herself. But some of them are installed in such a way that you could see that it wasn't somebody's first time, so maybe not.
Yeah.
No matter where we're working, if we're working in the valley or somewhere outside where there's not a jurisdiction of an inspection process, we're still going to follow the manufacturer's recommendation, and we're still going to follow that IBC code. So, I mean, we don't want anything coming back.
Sure, if you install outside of the warranty, then you're eating the roof when something goes
Right.
wrong instead of the manufacturer.
For the most common shortcuts that you see when you're maybe coming across other people's work, or
Shortcuts, some funny ones, right? Like it would be the things of not replacing the pipe jacks with new. We've had instances where for some reason they put on a ridge vent and they don't cut the ridge vent out.
I've
And
seen that a few times.
I think where that comes from is
Some crews where, the way they're set up is there's a tear off crew and an install crew. And so maybe the tear off crew didn't cut the vent out, but the install crew, they're not getting paid to cut vent out. So they're just like, well, that was supposed to be done. I'm just here to put on the shingles. And so like there's something like that happened, because you'll see the ridge vent is on there, but it hasn't been cut through. So, and that could cause a lot of problems. Just sometimes seeing where they didn't replace the edge metal for some reason. They're like, oh, I can save $250 and take my box of metal back. Stuff like that. So I would say those are the shortcuts that we see most often.
I just had a conversation this morning doing a roof intermediate inspection and drawing the layering of their drip edge for the rake edges, at the eave. Underlayment, ice and water goes over the top, rake
Right.
edges, that's reversed. That's one of the things, we see all the time in those intermediate inspections, is kind of the underlayment goes over everything. It can be a bit of a learning curve for some guys who have done it one way for their entire
Right.
careers, but that was my call out. And he said, well, the issue is I didn't take, that's the existing metal and I never took it off. And I said, well, you're going to have to.
That is an issue.
Yeah.
yeah, it's
The things that you see like that, and it's over an $8 piece of metal. It's like, why wouldn't you just spend that $8 on the piece of metal and just take that off and put on a new one? And then it'll be done right. And then it won't be called out. and then you won't have to redo it, you know?
They had a roofer tell me that on just that call that he'd been doing it that way for 20 years. And I was like, well, I don't know when it came into the code, but it sounds like you've been doing it wrong for 20 years.
Yeah.
It might be time to change the way you do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard an even more sophisticated argument. There's kind of a conversation about that within the roofing community. I'm like, well, there's not much conversation in the code book, so
Yeah.
You know, you just open up the book
right,
and you look, and then it says how it's supposed to be done, and that's,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and that's the way to do it. Even if you did prefer to do it the other way for some reason, you know, you're opening yourself up to a liability for no good reason. So you might as well just do it
Yeah.
the way the inspector.
right.
Well, and there's that kind of stuff in every trade, it seems. That, there's the preferred method and then there's the code method. And every once in a while, there's something that they don't agree far away from roofing. But we used to have this conversation with plumbers about caulking toilet bases. Does it rot out the floor? Does it not? Does it allow it to breathe? Or does it trap the moisture? You'd talk to 8 plumbers and get, 4 different answers. Each one would be strongly opinion on one way or the other. But the code book just says, caulk it.
Thought it was a good case of the drip edge thing because it was basically a valley, came down to like this instead of right where all the water was going, where you'd want it under, you couldn't because it was also the rake. So it was like, does it go?
Interesting.
Or does it go
It was kind of a funny case. So I took a picture of it and sent it to the city inspector and just said, it's an eave and a rake, so so like for that first bottom piece, we put it over and then we kind of put like a sacker, another piece just because it was right at the base of the valley.
But that speaks to your, I don't know, attention to detail that you're even going through that thought process.
Yeah.
I can't say that everybody's going through that thought process and worried about the detail enough to want to get that right.
And it's kind of funny, just still, been doing it for a lot of years, like when certain things like that come up that, I mean, because I enjoy what I do, and I take a lot of pride in what I do. And, it's kind of a fun case to, share with the inspector, to get their viewpoint on it and just kind of, because it's one you don't see every day, and so it's just kind of a fun little thing to share with them. And
you probably said, I wasn't going to look at it that close anyway, so can do whatever you feel like, I guess.
Stump, a little game of stump the inspector.
When I was a contractor, you never want to get called back for a problem, but you always want to get called back for the next project. I felt as well that it was always important to pay attention to the details because I was an electrician, but when anything comes up at all, electrical comes up more often than roofing, but when anything comes up, they want to modify anything whatsoever. I always wanted to be the guy that they think of because I paid attention to all those details before and communicated those effectively and blah, blah, blah. And that's what we appreciate about having worked with you guys for so long. Is very good at all of that.
I think part of being professional in the building industry, and I think, the really good realtors are like that. They're a resource.
Yeah.
We get calls from inspectors or a text message with hey, will you look at this for me, from inspectors, and also sometimes from the, even like the city inspectors, if they have a question, they'll, hey, can you look at this or look at this picture or tell me what's going on with this or whatever. And so I think
that's a good place to be in.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, because it's something you take a lot of pride in, is that, they know you're here as a resource,
Yeah, I know I've reached out to you once or twice where we don't get a whole lot of roofs that are showing signs of hail damage, but after a few storms or maybe a couple summers ago, I was seeing it more and more often. And because of
we had a significant hailstorm just south of here.
Yeah, kind of the Y or Y
got hit
area.
also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember sending you a couple photos and going, I'm going to call out hail damage but I want to make sure somebody else thinks the way I'm thinking right now first.
Yeah. And it's nice to have that, that kind of camaraderie and communication so that like if I'm uncertain about something, I can call you guys and be like, hey, I've opened up a roof. This is what I see on the insulation or the ventilation or what, there's things that are kind of might be outside of my scope that I'm like, oh, I need a professional second opinion. And likewise that you guys are complete pros and, are always educating yourselves on these things. So I know that I can call on you guys too. So it's really nice to have that.
It is quite a blessing in this business too. I just got a call from a general contractor this morning asking about a job they're on that we've never put eyes on, but I get those kind of calls quite often, just asking, like you're saying, what's the best course to go with this? How does it compare to code? What's the best practice? Blah, blah, blah. Then to have that ability to call them up and others in every trade is also a huge blessing. So like you said, that camaraderie is, I think, vital.
Yeah.
You kind of mentioned things within the attic space, insulation, ventilation, being sort of beyond the scope of a typical roof installation. But, then you run into issues where, the ridge vent isn't cut properly and things like that. So how much do you think that's a common miss for roofing contractors to not consider? We kind of talked about, systems of systems, or the building science of things. You can't take a well-ventilated roof and replace it with no ventilation, right? Or else, that could even impact the lifespan of the shingle as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I tell people, I'm not a systems expert. I don't have a degree in ventilation, insulation, or whatever. I do have a lot of experience with roofing, and so ventilation and insulation definitely plays into that. And I know you guys see it all the time. So when I'm looking at a residence, like if you're thinking of just a shingled house, one of the first things I'm looking for is under-eave vents, if they're there or not. And it's kind of it's an interesting gray zone in a way, because the city's not going to call you out on it for roofing. It's such an important part of the overall system of, they want you to cut in a ridge vent, but they don't say, hey, well, where's the intake vents? And those intake vents are super important. When I'm looking at a house, I'm looking for those intake vents to see if they're there. If there's some kind of sign that maybe it's like, oh, it gets too hot in here, or I don't get it because we just had someone insulate it, and I'm like, did the insulators block the vents? And so a lot of times, it's getting into the attic and looking back there and seeing if you can see that it's clear. Over time, that's definitely become an important part of my process, is making sure to the best of my ability that we're letting the hot air out with an roof exhaust vent of some sort, but also are the intake vents working, and can we get this air moving in this space, appropriately.
You can't exhaust it if you don't replace that air with something. So
just I would say, as much as your roof shingles or standing seam metal, all that kind of stuff, like super important, longevity, but just as important is your ventilation and insulation.
Right.
Because if you don't have those right systems in place, you could have popping nails, mold, condensation. A lot of bad things can happen. When we show up for, a roof inspection, we usually look for, we as much as we can in our scope of expertise, is there a way to make this roof system breathe better for the homeowner?
And probably knowing when to not add more insulation or more ventilation as well, because I do know there's, older houses that have gable vents on either side, and they may be sized properly to where that's getting plenty of ventilation. But if you add a ridge vent to that, then all of a sudden your intake from the gable vents are going, instead of full length gable to gable, it's going gable to the ridge.
Right.
And you're not necessarily getting that same kind of circulation through the full attic space too. I don't know if you've run into that.
It's interesting because if you don't put the ridge vent on, it's like this, then the city would be like, there's no ridge vent on there. They're going to make you put it on there. So you could make a case to close those off.
Okay.
And then put the ridge vent in.
Right. But you would have to get soffit vents in at that point, right?
Yeah. So there's a lot to sort of consider when you are changing, ventilation, because you want to get, as you guys know, you want a balanced system. So as close as you can get that to a 50-50 ratio, 50% at the eaves and 50% at the ridge, you've nailed it. But on an old house, maybe you can't do that for whatever reason. And so you just want to get it as close as you can to 50-50, because that's what you can do, or a funny hip-shaped roof is trying to figure out, sometimes ridge vent isn't the best solution. Sometimes maybe getting cams on a certain hip roof is a better, or maybe you need to add a mechanical roof vent because there's such little intake vent at the eave, maybe a mechanical roof vent is, a better solution to get the air moving. So each case is going to be unique. And again, there's some of that stuff is a gray zone with code compliance, but you just want to try to help the homeowner get that right to the best of your ability, depending on, what that attic space looks like.
And ventilation and insulation in a colder climate like ours is so important as well, because ice damming can be such a big issue.
Right. Yeah, the dreaded ice dam event every 2 years or whatever it is.
And that's a lot of that has to do with heat loss through the attic space, right? And so I think I just did a video about this on our social media pages, but installation of heat tape on top of asphalt shingles. But do you have a take on that?
I don't. And what's nice, I guess, about doing, these videos or doing like the reels, the one that I saw that you did with the heat tape, was and you had a picture there, in the video. And I thought that was a really good learning resource for me, because I hadn't really seen that before, where the heat tape actually looked like it was degrading the shingles. So that was an interesting, interesting case that you presented.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. I did something of value.
A lot of those heat tape systems or kits that they sell you, they'll come with a shingle clip, so you don't have to penetrate through the roof. But a lot of times they're put in with nails as well. So you're increasing the number of penetrations, the number of possibilities for leaks.
That one on that case, looked like it was a big heat tape. Maybe it was just like too industrial for the, you know what I mean? Like maybe there was a case of like more is better, and maybe they should have had a thinner wire that wasn't heating up they're like, oh, I'm going to use this great big tape. It's going to keep the snow melted off, and whoops, it also melted my shingles.
And regardless of the type of fastener method, whether it's a clip, which is a little less invasive, or a screw, even with a gasket, is over the course of time at the point of moisture intrusion. But what I've seen is that, especially on older roofs, even just the consistent exposure to direct heat like that can accelerate granular loss and sort of degradation of the shingle over time at the eave as well.
Shingle itself isn't expanding and contracting as a whole. It's doing it in pieces. And then in some cases it gets so hot that it starts flaking some of the older materials.
Right. As a roofer, do you get calls about, I have ice damming and I need you to fix it? And you have to kind of go through the explanation process of, that has less to do with the roofing material and more to do with ventilation and insulation?
Yeah, usually, what happens is like what happened this past winter, where it was like, it was warm, snowed a bunch, kind of got warm for a second, super cold, and like all of a sudden we had major ice dam issues. Usually in those circumstances, it's like you're just trying to just make it so there's not water coming on the inside of their house.
Right. Fix the immediate issue.
On an older house, it's inadequate ventilation and insulation, because back in the day, in 1940, they weren't putting in soffit vents, and they didn't have R50 insulation.
There's 2 inches of wood fiber insulation in the attic.
And so there's really not much you can do about it right in the instance. And then on the newer construction stuff, it seems like it's the funky shaped, multi-angled roofs.
Yeah, what's up with that?
And they just, what I mean? They can't, there's no way to get a 50-50 ventilation system going, or it's, like, where these architects, have all these angles coming into one area where it's just a problem. And so sometimes heat tape is your only solution. And
I'm afraid it was where they build the turrets in and they the spires and all this stuff. And you're going, how could you not expect problems?
Right. Yeah.
There's so many angles.
Yeah. One piece of advice that you might give to homeowners in terms of just maintaining their roof.
I would say for homeowners, it's, when it does snow and it snows a lot, like don't worry about it if it's not a problem. There's no reason to start shoveling your roof for no reason, because, it's like many times they just damage the shingles. I would say a lot of time homeowners get over concerned about moss and stuff maybe growing on there. And again, it's like they work so hard at getting off the moss or whatever that they damage the shingles.
Right.
Take a brush to it.
Yeah, take a brush to it or a shovel or a scraping, stuff like that. Shingles are meant to be, for the most part, maintenance free, so it's like, using a blower to blow out the valleys if leaves are collecting on there and stuff, but just don't go up there with your ice pick.
Tear off the ice.
Yeah.
That would probably be my best recommendation.
It's almost a call for less maintenance than more. Interesting.
So would you say there's similar things to those of like to pressure wash their roofs?
Yeah, I mean, the pressure washer is overkill.
Yeah.
Most times, it's like, if there's a little bit of, the new architectural shingles, most of them have an algae resistance built into them. And so, if that's a problem where you live, it shouldn't be until further on down the line. And by then, your shingles are probably getting old anyways. So it's like, don't worry about it too much, I think the biggest maintenance thing with a shingle or any roof, flat, metal, whatever, is just making sure, that all your drainage areas stay clean, free of debris. And really that's it, for most roof systems, they're meant to age over time. You just want to keep them clean and free of debris, but you not to a degree where you're scraping at them and poking at them and stuff like that.
Do you have an opinion of these products that are out there that say they can recondition your roof by spraying some?
Yeah, don't use them. It would be my personal advice, because of your better contractors are going to be certified with the manufacturer, and you should be getting a certificate of warranty with your new roof. And so that roof is going to have a really extensive manufacturer warranty with it. And as soon as you spray that conditioning stuff on, you just lost your warranty.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a roof that is under warranty from the manufacturer, that's really what you want and need. And the second you do something to it that doesn't meet the manufacturer spec, you're going to lose your warranty. So it's probably not worth it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm. Well, if people want to learn more about you and your company, where can they go?
They can go to our website, which is independentroofingmt.com.
Perfect. Well,
Perfect. Thank you, Will Malone with Independent Roofing.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun to do the podcast with you today. Appreciate it.
yeah.
Great conversation. So thank you.